The banishment, 800 words. The night sky of the alien world was heavy with clouds, and a cold wind moved through the silent city. In the center stood the High Council, a tall stone hall where powerful leaders decided the fate of their people. Inside, the air was sharp and cruel, not with justice but with fear. At the very end of the hall, a small alien girl stood alone, her body shaking, her eyes red from crying. Her mother, once a respected healer of their kind, had died only days ago. The girl had no family left, no protection, and no one to defend her. But instead of comfort, the council gave her judgment. "You are a danger," one of the elders said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You bring bad luck, and your bloodline is cursed." The little girl wanted to shout, to fight, to tell them they were wrong, but she was too weak, too broken, and too lost. Her voice came out only as a whisper. "Please, I only want to live." The council did not listen. The guards grabbed her small arms and dragged her out of the hall. Outside, the city gates opened with a loud groan. Darkness spread across the land beyond, an endless forest filled with beasts and poison. The girl's heart pounded, her breathing sharp and quick. The guards pushed her out into the cold night, their faces hard with no pity. "You are banished," they declared. "If you return, you will be killed." The gates closed with a final sound, heavy and final like a hammer striking stone. The little girl was alone. She looked back once, but there was nothing behind her anymore. Only walls and hatred. Her feet sank into the wet ground. Her bare hands clutched at her thin clothes. Every step into the wild was a step into fear. The forest was alive with whispers. Strange glowing insects moved between the trees. Far away, something howled, long and hungry. The girl shivered and pulled her knees to her chest, hiding behind a rock. Her stomach growled, but she had no food. Her lips cracked, but she had no water. Time passed slowly. Every minute felt like an hour. Her small body grew weaker. Memories of her mother's warm arms came back to her, and tears filled her eyes. She whispered to herself, "Mother, I miss you. Please don't leave me alone." But the forest did not answer. Only shadows moved and the sound of something heavy stepping through the leaves. The girl froze, her breath stuck in her throat. Two yellow eyes glowed in the dark, watching her. From the trees, a beast, tall and thin, stepped out, its teeth sharp, its claws ready. The girl could not run. Her legs would not move. The beast crept closer, sniffing the air. Her heart beat like a drum in her chest. She tried to crawl backward, but there was nowhere to go, only the cliff behind her. Her hand slipped on the rocks, her body shaking. She closed her eyes, ready for the end. But then, a strange sound echoed through the forest. A strong voice shouted, not in her language but powerful and commanding. The beast stopped and turned its head, growling low. Another sound followed, the crack of fire, the spark of a strange weapon. The girl opened her eyes, and in the shadow of the trees she saw a figure. It was tall but not like her people. It wore strange clothes, heavy boots, and carried fire in its hand. The beast snarled and backed away, sensing danger. The figure stepped forward, standing between the girl and the monster. The girl's eyes widened, her breath caught. She had heard of them before, whispered in fear and awe. A human. The beast retreated into the dark, leaving only silence behind. The forest grew still again, but the girl's world had already changed. The human turned, his face hidden under shadows. For a moment, neither spoke. The girl trembled, unsure if this new creature was savior or doom. But deep inside, in that moment of fear and hope, one truth became clear. Her story was not ending tonight. It was only beginning. The human's arrival, 800 words. The night did not end. The little alien girl sat shivering against the cold stone cliff, her tiny hands pressed to her chest. She had seen death coming and she had accepted it. But instead, something impossible had appeared, a creature from the old stories. A being her mother once whispered about with both fear and wonder. A human. The human stood tall, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. He held in his hand a strange tool that glowed faint red, a weapon unlike anything the girl had seen before. His clothes were thick and torn in places, showing signs of long travel. On his back was a heavy pack, carrying things the girl could not name. His eyes scanned the shadows where the beast had run, sharp and alert. Only after silence returned did he turn toward the girl. The girl pressed herself tighter against the rock, her body trembling. Humans were dangerous, her people had always said. They came from distant stars, they fought wars, they destroyed. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her legs were weak, her body too tired. The human took a step closer. Slowly, carefully, he lowered the glowing tool and lifted his other hand open, palm facing her. It was not a gesture of attack, but of peace. The girl did not move, her large eyes staring at him with both fear and curiosity. The human crouched down so his shape seemed smaller, less threatening. He spoke, his voice deep but calm, words she could not understand. Still, she felt something in his tone, a softness. The human pointed toward her thin arms and shivering body. Then he reached into his pack and pulled out a small wrapped item. He placed it on the ground between them and pushed it forward. The girl blinked, her hunger burning inside. It was food, strange and shaped like a small brown bar. The smell was unfamiliar, but her empty stomach cried out. She looked from the food to the human, unsure. His eyes, though different, held no cruelty, only patience. Slowly, with shaking fingers, the girl reached out and grabbed the food. She bit into it, and though it was dry and odd, it filled her with warmth and strength. The human gave a small nod as if relieved. He sat down on a rock nearby, never turning his back to the forest. The girl chewed quietly, watching him. Every movement of his hands was steady, practiced, like a hunter who had survived many dangers. She wondered why he was here, why he had saved her, but she could not ask, for their languages were different. Instead, she whispered in her own tongue, "Why, help me." Her voice was so soft, almost lost in the wind. The human tilted his head as if he had understood her question not by words but by feeling. He looked at her with an expression she could not name. It was not pity, not anger, but something deeper. He tapped his chest with his hand, then pointed to her. It was a gesture that said, "I will protect you." For the first time since her mother's death, the girl felt something stir inside her. Hope, small and fragile, but alive. She pulled the blanket of her thin arms tighter and kept her eyes on the human. The forest, however, was not finished with them. Far away, another howl rose, louder than before, joined by more voices. The beasts were returning, and they were not alone this time. The human's head snapped toward the sound. He stood quickly and readied his weapon. The girl felt her heart race again, fear clawing at her chest. The human motioned for her to follow, his hand waving forward. At first she hesitated, but when the howls grew closer, she scrambled to her feet. Her legs stumbled, but the human caught her arm and pulled her forward with surprising gentleness. They ran together through the trees, the forest glowing with strange lights and shadows. Branches scratched her skin and roots nearly tripped her, but the human's grip kept her steady, guiding her step by step. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, heavy paws and snapping jaws. The girl dared not look back. Her breath came in sharp bursts, but the human never slowed. He carried her when her legs failed, lifting her, as if she weighed nothing. Through the chaos, she could feel the beat of his heart against her, strong and unshaken. Finally, they reached a small clearing. The human placed her down gently and pulled a small device from his pack. He pressed a button and a blue light spread around them, faint but humming with energy. The girl stared in awe as the forest sound seemed to soften. The beasts circled nearby, but they did not enter the light. Whatever the human had activated, it kept the predators away. The girl sat on the ground, exhausted but safe, her eyes fixed on this strange protector who had come from nowhere. The human knelt, checking her wounds, tearing cloth from his own shirt to bandage her small cuts. He worked without words, only quiet focus. The girl watched his face, the lines of fatigue, the scars of past battles. And for the first time she thought, maybe he was not here by accident. Maybe fate had brought him. The night stretched on, but now it was different. Where once there was only loneliness and despair, now there was a fragile thread of trust. The little alien girl leaned against the human's side, too tired to stay awake. Her eyes closed slowly, her fear melting into sleep. The human sat still, guarding her, his weapon across his lap, his eyes on the dark forest. The beasts still waited beyond the blue light, but inside its circle, there was safety. For the first time, the girl was not alone, and in that silence the bond between them began to grow. The first battle, 800 words. The night was quiet, but the silence was not peace. It was the silence of hunters waiting. The little alien girl slept curled beside the human, her breathing soft. But beyond the blue shield of light, yellow eyes glowed in the darkness. The beasts had not left. They were watching, circling, testing. The human knew the shield would not last forever. Its light was already dimming, the hum fading. He reached into his pack, checking what little he had. A knife, a few energy cells, and a broken communicator. Not enough for a long war, only enough for survival. His eyes shifted to the girl, her face pale but calm in sleep. He clenched his jaw, knowing she had no strength to run. If the beast came, he would have to fight. The forest wind carried the smell of danger. A low growl rumbled through the trees, deep and hungry. The girl stirred in her sleep, whispering her mother's name. The human placed a hand gently on her shoulder, calming her without words. Then, the shield flickered once, then again. The blue light vanished, leaving only the cold night and the hungry eyes. The first beast leapt from the shadows, its claws slicing through the air. The human moved fast, rolling to his feet, pulling. The knife-free metal clashed against flesh, the knife cutting deep into the creature's side. It screamed, a sound that shook the forest and fell back into the shadows. But more came, 2, then 3, snarling and snapping, their bodies long and twisted, their fangs shining with wet hunger. The girl woke with a cry, fear flooding her small body. She tried to crawl away, but her legs were too weak. The human shouted, his voice sharp, not in her language but filled with command. "Stay down," he barked, pointing for her to stay behind the rock. She understood not the words but the tone. She pressed herself flat, trembling, watching with wide eyes. The beasts circled, their movements quick and clever. One rushed from the left, another from behind. The human spun, knife flashing, cutting across one's jaw. With his other hand, he raised his small weapon, firing a burst of red light. The beam struck another beast, burning its hide, but the weapon sputtered and clicked, energy cells dying. He cursed under his breath, tossing it aside. Now only the knife remained. The girl's heart hammered in her chest. Every movement of the human was desperate yet fearless. He fought like one who had known battle many times before. The beasts plunged again, faster, harder. One claw cut across his arm, blood running down, but he did not fall. He did not retreat. Instead, he drove the knife deep into its chest, pushing until the beast collapsed. The ground shook with the fight. The girl could barely breathe as she watched. She wanted to help, but she was too small, too weak. Tears filled her eyes as the human stood against monsters that even grown warriors of her people would fear. She whispered to herself, "Why does he fight for me? Why not leave me?" The last beast lunged, its jaws snapping toward the human's throat. He twisted at the last second, slamming his elbow into its head. The force stunned the creature, giving him one final chance. With a roar, he drove the blade into its heart. The beast let out one last howl before crashing to the ground, still and lifeless. Silence returned, heavy and deep. The human stood swaying, blood dripping from his arm, his chest heaving with breath. The knife slipped from his hand, clattering. To the ground for a moment, he simply stood, staring at the dark forest. Then slowly, he turned to the girl. Her eyes were wide, tears shining. She crawled to him, her hands shaking. She touched his arm, the wound hot and wet. He winced, but did not pull away. Instead, he knelt to her level, his face tired but steady. He spoke softly, words she still did not know, but his tone told her everything. "It's over. You're safe." The girl's throat tightened. No one had ever fought for her like this. Not her people, not the council, no one. And now, a stranger from another world had risked his, life again and again to protect her. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but all she could manage was a whisper. Why? The human looked at her for a long moment. Then he placed a hand on her head, gentle, almost fatherly. His eyes softened, though his body was worn with battle. No words came, but the touch itself was an answer. Because she mattered. They stayed. There the bodies of the beasts scattered around. The forest was quiet, too quiet, as if holding its breath. The girl leaned against him, exhausted, her fear slowly melting into trust. But deep inside she knew this fight was not the last. If the beasts could find them, then so could others. And her people, the ones who banished her, would not stop searching. This was only the beginning of their struggle. And though the girl was small and weak, a fire had begun to grow inside her. A fire that whispered she was not truly alone anymore. Not while the human stood beside her, ready to fight. The bond. 800 words. The forest was quiet again, but the quiet felt fragile. The bodies of the slain beasts lay scattered on the ground, their dark blood soaking into the earth. The little alien girl sat close to the human, her eyes wide and unblinking. She could not believe what she had seen. He had fought monsters with nothing but a knife and courage. He had bled for her, a stranger when her own people had cast her away. The human tore a strip of cloth from his own shirt and wrapped it around his bleeding arm. His movements were steady, as if wounds were nothing new to him. He tied the cloth tight and gave a sharp breath, then sat down heavily on a rock. For a moment the two said nothing. The girl stared at him, afraid but curious. The human reached into his pack again, pulling out another bar of strange food. He broke it in half, keeping one piece and gently offering the other to her. She hesitated, looking at the food, then at him. Her stomach growled, loud in the silent night. Slowly, she reached out and took the piece, her fingers brushing his hand. It was warm, rough, and strong, unlike anything she had ever felt. She ate in small bites, watching him the whole time. The human chewed quietly too, his eyes scanning the trees. Even while resting, he stayed alert, like a guardian who could not afford sleep. The fire between them was small, built from broken branches. Its flames flickered and painted shadows on their faces. The girl hugged her knees, her voice trembling. "My people, they hate me," she whispered in her own tongue. She knew he could not understand, but she had to speak. "They say I am cursed, that my blood is wrong." Her words fell into the night, unheard by him, yet somehow understood. The human looked at her, his face calm but thoughtful. He tapped his chest with his hand, then pointed to her again. The same gesture as before, simple but powerful. "You are not alone," his body seemed to say. The girl's eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them quickly, ashamed to show weakness, but the human shook his head gently, as if telling her it was all right to feel. For the first time, she believed that maybe she was not a curse. Maybe she was just a child who deserved to live. Hours passed, the fire slowly shrinking. The girl leaned against the rock, exhaustion pulling at her body, but her eyes stayed on the human. She studied his scars, the lines on his face, the steady rise and fall of his chest. She wondered where he came from, what battles he had seen. Why had he come here? Why save her? There was mystery in him, but not the kind that frightened her. It was the kind that gave her hope. The human, noticing her gaze, gave a small smile. Tired but kind. He reached into his pack again and pulled out something new. It was a thin blanket, patched and worn but warm. He draped it over her small shoulders. The girl gasped softly, unused to such kindness. She clutched the blanket, pressing it close to her chest. Her people had given her nothing but pain, but this stranger gave her warmth. The night grew colder, and the human stoked the fire with careful hands. The girl moved closer, her small body trembling less now. She whispered softly, "Thank you," though she knew he would not understand. Still, she thought maybe he felt the meaning. The human looked at her again, his eyes steady. For a brief moment she felt safe. The fear that had lived in her heart since her mother's death began to loosen. It did not vanish, but it no longer ruled her. Suddenly, a sharp sound cracked through the night, not a beast, not the wind, something else. The human stiffened, his hand moving to his knife. The girl froze, her heart racing. From far away, a faint light moved through the forest, not the glow of insects or fire, but cold, metallic light. Ships. Her people's hunters were near, searching. The girl's stomach turned to ice. She whispered in fear, "They've come for me." The human glanced at her, then back toward the distant lights. He understood enough. His jaw tightened and his hand rested on her shoulder firmly. No words, only a promise in his eyes. "I will not let them take you." The girl's chest tightened, both in fear and in something she did not know how to name. Trust. She nodded slowly, her small hands clutching the edge of the blanket. The lights in the forest faded again, moving in another direction. The hunters had not found them yet. The human eased, lowering his knife. But the warning was clear. Danger was growing. The girl sat silently, her heart pounding. She looked at the human, her voice barely a whisper. "Will you stay with me?" The human did not answer with words. Instead, he placed his hand gently on her head again, a silent vow. The fire burned low, but its warmth was enough. The girl leaned against him, her body small against his side. The stars above broke through the clouds, faint but shining. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of sleep take her. The human stayed awake, his hand never far from his knife, his eyes never leaving the dark forest. But when he glanced down at the girl, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, something stirred in him too. Not duty, not survival, something stronger. A bond had been born, fragile but unbreakable, and it would soon be tested by the dangers still to come. The pursuit, 800 words. The morning came slowly. The pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, painting the forest in silver shadows. The little alien girl woke with a start, her heart still heavy with fear. Beside her, the human sat awake, his back straight, his weapon in hand. He had not slept, not even for a moment. His eyes were sharp, scanning the forest for danger. The girl sat up, clutching the blanket he had given her. For a short time she felt safe, but the memory of last night's lights burned in her mind. The hunters, her people, were searching. They would not stop until she was gone forever. She whispered in her own tongue, "They will find us." Her voice cracked, but the human seemed to understand the weight of her fear. He nodded once, his jaw tight. He rose and motioned for her to follow. His hand pointed forward through the forest. The message was clear. "We cannot stay here." The girl's legs were weak, but she pushed herself up. The human moved carefully, guiding her steps. Every sound in the forest seemed louder now, the snap of a twig, the call of a bird, the rustle of leaves. The girl flinched at each one, but the human walked steady. He moved with the quiet confidence of a hunter, step by step. They left the clearing behind. Hours passed, the forest stretching endless before them. The girl's feet ached, and her stomach growled with hunger. The human stopped at a stream, kneeling to fill a small container. He handed it to her, and the cold water soothed her dry throat. For a brief moment, she smiled, a small, fragile smile. But it vanished when a sudden noise cracked through the trees, a sharp hum, then the hiss of engines. The human's head snapped upward, his eyes narrowing. Through the branches, dark shapes moved across the sky. Hunter ships, they're metallic. Bodies glowed faintly, scanning the ground below. The girl gasped, fear flooding her chest. She grabbed the human's arm, whispering, "They are here." The human pulled her close and pressed a finger to his lips. He crouched low, leading her into the cover of thick bushes. They waited as the ships passed overhead, beams of light sweeping across the forest floor. The girl buried her face against his arm, trembling. The light came close, too close. She held her breath, praying the forest would hide them. At last the ships drifted past, their sound fading into the distance. The girl let out a shaky breath, but the human did not relax. He knew this was only the beginning. The hunters were spreading out, searching every corner. Soon soldiers would land, and then hiding would no longer be enough. The human stood and looked into the trees. He made a quick decision and pointed deeper into the forest. There was no time to rest, no time to wait. The girl followed, her steps quick and clumsy. Her heart pounded as branches whipped against her face. The forest felt alive with danger, as though every shadow hid an enemy. By midday, the sound of boots echoed in the distance. Voices, harsh, commanding, spoke in her people's tongue. The girl's blood turned cold. They were close, too close. The human heard it too, his body tense. He grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. Running now. The forest blurred as they pushed through, but the hunters were skilled. The girl could hear them behind, their steps fast, their voices sharp. One shouted, "She cannot escape. Find the cursed child." Her chest tightened with pain. Even now they called her cursed. The human glanced at her, reading the fear in her eyes. He gave her hand a squeeze, firm, unshaken. It was his silent promise again. "You are not cursed. You are worth saving." Thor. Chase grew wild. Branches cracked, roots pulled at their feet. The sound of weapons hummed behind them, beams cutting through trees. The girl stumbled, falling hard onto the ground. Pain shot through her leg and she cried out. The human spun, back lifting her into his arms without hesitation. He ran with her, clutched against his chest. His breath was heavy, but his steps never slowed. The hunters' voices grew louder. The girl buried her face against him, hot tears burning her cheeks. "Leave me," she whispered. "You cannot fight them all." But the human only tightened, his grip, his face set like stone. He would not leave her. Not now. Not ever. They reached a narrow path between jagged rocks. The human slid down carefully, his boots scraping against stone. The girl clung to him, her heart racing. Behind them, shouts echoed. The hunters had found their trail. The human set her down gently, motioning for silence. He picked up a handful of dirt and scattered it across the path, confusing the tracks, hiding their trail. For a while they moved unseen. The girl's heart pounded with every step. But even as fear consumed her, something else grew inside. A strange strength, a small spark, because for the first time in her life someone was fighting for her. Not because of duty, not because of law, but because she mattered to him. As night fell, they found shelter inside the hollow of an ancient tree. The human crouched at the entrance, knife ready. The girl sat inside, hugging the blanket close. Her body ached, but her spirit felt alive. She whispered softly, "Why do you risk so much for me?" Her voice was fragile but hopeful. The human turned, his face lit faintly by moonlight. He did not speak, but his eyes gave the answer again, because no one deserves to be hunted. The forest outside grew quiet, but both knew the hunters would not stop. The pursuit had only begun, and tomorrow the danger would grow even greater. The escape. 800 words. The night was long, and the hollow tree gave little comfort. The girl barely slept, waking often from nightmares. Each time she saw the human sitting at the entrance, weapon in hand, eyes never closing. He was like a wall between her and the dark world outside. When dawn came, gray and heavy, he motioned for her to rise. It was time to move again. The forest was no longer safe. The hunters were everywhere, their voices echoing through the trees. The girl could hear the hum of their weapons, the crackle of scanners. Each sound sent fear into her chest. The human stayed calm, leading her step by step. He moved with the skill of one who had spent a lifetime escaping danger. They walked for hours, slipping through shadows. The girl's small legs grew weak, but she pushed forward. She did not want to slow him down. Still, she stumbled often, and each time the human lifted her without complaint. Carrying her as though she was weightless, her heart warmed even as fear pressed down on her. She whispered softly, "Don't leave me." He gave her a steady look, a silent vow. He would not. By midday, they reached a strange clearing. The remains of ancient stone towers rose like broken teeth from the earth. The air was cold, filled with the memory of old battles. The girl had heard of these ruins in stories, a place where warriors once fought in a war so old no one remembered its reason. The human paused, his eyes scanning the ground. Something about the ruins gave him hope. He led her inside a cracked tunnel hidden beneath a fallen tower. The walls were covered in carvings and dust. Their steps echoed as they moved deeper into the dark. The girl clutched his hand, her heart racing. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading into shadows that seemed endless. Yet for the first time, she felt safer than in the open forest, but safety did not last. The hunters were clever. Soon the sound of boots and harsh voices echoed through the ruins. They had found the trail again. The girl gasped, her body trembling. The human pressed a finger to his lips, urging silence. He pulled her deeper into the tunnels. The ruins became a maze, each turn leading to another dark passage. The girl struggled to keep up, her breath sharp and quick, but she could hear the hunters behind closing in. Their voices grew louder. "Find the child, she cannot escape again." Her legs nearly gave out, but the human pulled her forward. At last they reached a chamber lit by shafts of pale light. But ahead was no exit, only a wide crack in the stone wall that opened onto nothing. The girl's eyes widened. Beyond the crack was a sheer cliff dropping into mist and shadows. There was no bridge, no path, only the endless fall below. She turned to the human, panic rising. "We are trapped," she whispered, her voice breaking. The hunter's footsteps thundered. Closer, the human looked at the cliff, then at the girl. His jaw tightened, his eyes sharp with decision. He pointed toward the cliff, then back to her. The girl shook her head in fear. "No, we will die." But the human's gaze was firm, unshaken. He reached into his pack and pulled out a rope. Old, frayed, but strong enough. He tied it quickly, around a broken stone pillar, and looped the other end around his waist. Then he lifted the girl into his arms. Her heart raced, her small hands clutching his shirt. Behind them, voices shouted. The hunters had entered the chamber. The human gave one last look at the cliff. Then, without hesitation, he stepped into the open air. The girl screamed, the wind tearing past her face, but the rope snapped tight, swinging them hard against the cliffside. The human grunted, his grip strong as iron. With one hand, he caught hold of a jagged edge. Dangling in the air, he pulled them slowly downward. The rope groaned under their weight, stones crumbling beneath his boots. But he did not stop. The girl buried her face against him, tears streaming. Above, shouts filled the air, hunters firing beams down the cliff. The human pressed against the rock, moving carefully, shielding her with his body. Sparks flew as shot struck stone around them. The rope slipped, but he caught another ledge, step by step. He lowered them deeper into the mist. Finally, they reached a narrow outcrop hidden beneath the cliff. The hunters above shouted in frustration, unable to see where they had gone. The human pulled the girl into the safety of a cave carved into. The rock inside, the air was damp and cool. The girl trembled, her chest heaving with fear. The human set her down gently, his own body shaking with exhaustion. For a long moment they sat in silence. The girl looked at him, her eyes wide, her voice small. "You saved me again," she whispered. Her words were soft, filled with wonder. The human gave a tired nod, his breathing heavy. He leaned back against the stone wall, eyes closing for just a second. The girl crawled closer, wrapping the blanket around them both. She pressed her small hand against his injured arm. Though she could not heal, she wanted to give comfort. He opened his eyes and met hers. For a brief moment, the fear faded, replaced by something stronger. "Trust," the girl whispered. "As long as you are here." "I am not afraid." The human said nothing, but his hand rested on her shoulder, steady and firm. The world outside was still full of hunters and dangers. But inside the hidden cave, they had survived another day. And though the path ahead was unknown, one truth was clear. They would face it together. The final stand. 800 words. The cave was dark and quiet, but the human knew it would not protect them for long. The hunters were still out there, searching every shadow, every path. They had followed this far, and they would not stop until the girl was gone. The little alien girl sat close beside him, clutching the worn blanket. Her eyes looked to him not with fear now, but with trust, for she knew one thing. He would fight for her until his last breath. The human rested only a short while before he rose again. His body ached, his arms still bleeding from old wounds, but his eyes burned with determination. He checked his knife, his last weapon, and tightened the rope around his belt. He had nothing left to give except his strength and his will, and that, he decided, would be enough. The girl touched his arm, softly. "Please, don't go," she whispered in her own tongue. Her voice trembled, but her eyes begged him to stay. The human crouched low, meeting her gaze. He placed a hand gently on her head, the same silent vow as before. "I will protect you." Then he pointed to the deeper shadows of the cave, telling her without words to hide. The girl shook her head, tears filling her eyes. She did not want to be left behind, but the human pressed a finger to his lips. She understood. Silence could save them. Slowly, with heavy steps, she crawled into the dark corner of the cave, her small body shaking, her heart pounding. But she stayed because she trusted him. Moments later, the sound of boots echoed against the stone. The hunters had found the cave. Their lights cut through the darkness, beams sweeping across the walls. Voices barked orders, harsh and cruel. The human stood at the entrance, blocking the path, his shadow tall and unyielding. The hunters stopped when they saw him, a lone figure with nothing but a knife standing in their way. One of them laughed. "Step aside, human. That child is cursed. She must die." The human said nothing. He only gripped the knife tighter, his body steady. The hunters raised their glowing weapons. The girl's breath caught in her throat as she watched from the shadows. Her small hands covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. The first blast came. The human dodged, rolling to the side. The beam scorched the stone, filling the cave with smoke and sparks. He charged forward, his knife flashing in the dim light. The nearest hunter cried out as steel met flesh. The cave erupted into chaos. Blasts, shouts, the clash of battle. The girl trembled, her body frozen. Every part of her wanted to scream, to run, but something deeper stirred inside her. The fire she had felt before now burned stronger. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "You are not cursed, my child. You are stronger than you know." The human fought fiercely, but he was only one. Blow after blow landed, his body staggering. Still, he rose each time, protecting the cave entrance with every ounce of strength. The girl saw him fall to one knee, blood on his face. Her heart screamed in terror. "No!" she cried, her voice breaking the silence. The hunters turned, their weapons aiming toward her. The human roared, trying to shield her. But in that moment, something within the girl awakened. Her eyes glowed with a strange light. The air around her shimmered, crackling with energy. The hunters froze, startled by the sudden power. A force burst from the girl, sweeping through the cave like a storm. The walls shook, dust falling from the ceiling. The hunters cried out as the energy struck them, their weapons shattered, their bodies thrown back. The light grew brighter, wrapping around the girl like a shield. She had never known this strength, but it flowed through her like fire and water combined. The human shielded his eyes, watching in awe. The girl stood tall for the first time, her small frame glowing with power. She cried out, not in fear but in defiance, "I am not cursed." Her voice echoed through the cave. The hunters staggered, their faces twisted in fear. Then the light burst outward one last time, and silence fell. The hunters lay scattered, unconscious or fleeing into the shadows. The girl collapsed to her knees, the light fading. Her body trembled, exhausted. The human rushed to her, dropping to the ground beside her. He pulled her close, his arms steady and warm. She wept against his chest, whispering, "I thought I lost you." The human said nothing, but his hand rested on her back. His strength was her comfort. When the dust settled, they stepped out of the cave together. The forest was quiet again. The hunters gone. The air was fresh. The morning sun breaking. Through the clouds, the girl looked up at the human, her small hand gripping his tightly. Her eyes were filled with something new, not just trust, but hope. "Where will we go?" she asked softly, though she knew he could not understand. The human looked at the horizon, his face calm but determined. Wherever they went, they would face it together. The girl smiled for the first time since her mother's death. She was no longer alone. She was no longer cursed. She had found someone who fought for her, who believed in her. And in that bond, strong and unbreakable, a new story began. Not of fear, not of banishment, but of survival, hope, and the promise of a future.